Hello, in this video we'll be covering how to use the plug gauge, the thread plug gauge, and the step pin gauge, and how to use them to measure the tolerances of parts. In this procedure, we will use a bore plug gauge to check the various parts to determine if the IDs are acceptable. These shafts have a bore hole in each end and inside threads on the other. The shafts also have a diameter reduction. So to start with, let's look at what a bore plug gauge is. This is our bore plug gauge. One side has a go diameter, and the go diameter for this particular one is 0.3750. The other side has a no-go, which the no-go side is 0.3770. So the way that these are used is we will take the bore gauge or the plug gauge and we will insert it into the bore of the part. So the bore of this part is actually the recessed hole that has been machined into each one of these parts. So this one, you can see there's no threads or anything in this side. We flip it over and you can actually see the threads in the other side. So for this particular exercise, we are just going to be using this side of each one of the parts. So the way that we use our bore gauge is we take our dominant hand, my left hand for me, and we insert the gauge as straight as possible into the part. And we should feel a little bit of resistance, but not resistance with metal against metal, more like air being pushed out as far as resistance. And then we will repeat the step on the no-go side. So this one, you see how the no-go side goes in as well. So since the no-go gauge goes in as well as the go gauge, we know that the part is outside of tolerance. So we know that the bore of this part is greater than 0.3770, and this part cannot be used. So moving down to our next one, we will start again with our go gauge, and we will insert it in. This one goes in, and it feels like it's pushing air out, so that's a good sign. And then we're going to flip it over again, and we're going to try our no-go gauge. And our no-go gauge does not go in. So we know that this part falls within tolerances and can be used. Lastly, our third one, we will start again with our no-go gauge, or our go gauge, and try to insert it, and we see that our go gauge will not go in, which means that the part tolerance is less than 0.3750, and this part cannot be used. In this procedure, we'll use a thread plug gauge to check the inside threads of various parts. The green end of the gauge contains the go plug. So this end right here is the go plug. The red end contains the no-go plug, so it's this end right here. You should also note that some data concerning the plug gauge is stamped onto the main body of the gauge. So looking at this, we can see that it actually says go and no-go. And then rotating it, we can see that the go side has a tolerance of 0.2175 for this particular one. And this one shows that we will be using it to test for 1/4 inch by 20 UNC-3B. The no-go side has a tolerance of 0.2211. So starting out, we want to look at these. We're going to take our gauge and we're going to use my dominant hand, so my left hand, and we are going to attempt to insert it, the go gauge, into the thread to see if it threads easily. Make sure that that it's straight and not cross-threaded, and you're going to attempt to screw it in and look for resistance. This one screws in great. So we're going to back this one back out, and we're going to attempt this again with the no-go side. So the no-go side, we insert it, making sure not to cross-thread, and we're going to rotate in, and we start getting some binding. So we know that this particular part falls within tolerance. So this is a good part. Moving on to our next part, we're going to start with our go side, and this one, you can see I'm getting it straight, and it won't even start. So we know that this part is actually undersized. So it's smaller than the 0.2175. So this one also fails. And just for, examination, we can, check that the no-go side doesn't go either. The third part that we'll be checking, let's try again with our go side. Our go side goes in fine. So it threads perfectly well, no issues there. And we will flip it over again and check our no-go side. And our no-go side also threads in perfectly fine with no issues. So that means that this part is also oversized, so it's larger than, or it is 2.211 or larger. So this is also, this part is no good. So out of these three parts, the only part that is good is the very first part. In this procedure, we will test the bores of the test shafts with a step pin gauge. A step pin gauge varies from a bore plug gauge by the fact that they have actual steps. So you have this particular shaft has two separate steps. One is 0.3768 and one is 0.3752. The first step indicates the go and the second step indicates the no-go. The nominal diameter of the go step and the no-go step are typically stamped on the shafts. On this particular gauge, the go step has a diameter of 0.3752 inches and the no-go step measures 0.3768. When using the step pin gauge, we will take it in our hand and we will pick up the part and we will attempt to insert it into the bore. This one inserts into the bore and it stops at the end of the first step. So this part shows to be good. Next, we take the next part and we're going to insert it and it actually travels past the step. So it's hard to see the step in this, but if you look, you can actually see the machining right here, how it changes. So you can actually see where one step starts and one ends. So with this part, when it inserts, since it goes past that second step or that step, we know that this is a bad part. The last part we're going to put in, and we can try to put it in straight, and this one actually doesn't even fit in, so we know that this part has been undersized and can be sent for rework.